Welcome to Washington Watch with Congressman Walter Jones. Each month, we take a look at the events happening in Washington, D.C. and how they affect our lives here in eastern North Carolina.
Beautiful little horse. It is God's gift to the world. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you for...
And now, here's your Congressman, Walter Jones.
Welcome to the October edition of Washington Watch. Today's guest is Congressman Meadows, who represents the 11th District of North Carolina. He serves on the Oversight and Governmental Affairs Committee, Transportation and Infrastructure, and Foreign Affairs Committees. He is a very busy man. Congressman Meadows has worked for 27 years as a small business owner. He is married to his lovely wife, Debbie, and they have 2 children. This is his first term in the United States Congress, and he has really distinguished himself among both parties as being a young man that's going to be a leader of the House, a young man who also speaks very candidly and frankly about the issues facing our nation. And we're going to get into some of those issues in just a moment. He and his wife, Debbie, have 2 children. And Mark, I'm so happy to have you. You're from the mountains of North Carolina. I represent, along with 2 other members of Congress, the coastal area, and it's great to have you on our show. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, Walter, it's good to be with you, and it's an honor to serve, but it's also an honor to serve with such a great man as yourself. As you know, we've been able to work together on quite a few issues, and it's just, I'm glad to be with you today.
Well, Mark, thank you very much, and your class has been a very interesting class. You, obviously, and others have been very outspoken about our country, about the economy, about Obamacare, and the growing debt of our nation. And I'd like to start with really those three issues. I know that you're from the mountains of North Carolina. Can you share with the people watching this show what your unemployment rate has been in the district that you represent?
Well, we've got one of the most tragic stories in the country, truly. I've got 2 counties. I represent 17 counties. I have 2 counties that have some of the highest unemployment in the state as well as the highest in the nation. We've been at 15 to 17% unemployment. And we've had double-digit through most of my counties, and so it's been very severe, and people are looking for answers, and they want to have a hope again, and that's why what we're doing is so critical in terms of trying to make sure that we're responsible fiscally, but the other part of that is create an environment so jobs can be created.
Mark, this does tie into your statement. You have been outspoken about Obamacare, and I've said many times that, yes, we needed to fix the health care system of America, but not by having the federal government to take over health care.
Yeah.
Would you share some of your feelings and with the people watching this show as to why you ran for Congress, and was this one of those major issues?
Well, it was one of the major issues that I campaigned on, but what we're finding is every day, you and I both know that the stories that are being told really are about families being hurt back home. And so whether it's in Eastern Carolina or Western Carolina, where I'm from, it's people that want health care that we need to provide. You know, I'm a believer that we've got to be a compassionate people, that we care about people. And pre-existing conditions is a huge problem that we had to address. But when we have a government takeover of our health care system, and that's really what we're talking about now, it has unintended consequences. One is that we're seeing that people can't keep the coverage they were promised they could keep. North Carolina, Forbes just reported that North Carolina is one of the worst hit areas in terms of the top 2 in terms of percentage increase in insurance rates because of Obamacare. And so a healthy 27-year-old young man right now could get coverage for $35 before Obamacare. After Obamacare, it's going to cost $185. So, you know, that kind of increase really has significant impact.
I think that you have been saying, we have been saying, meaning the Congress, those of us who are concerned about Obamacare, that when October 1 comes, it will be shell shock for a lot of people. And thank you for sharing those numbers, which are really, that's a lot of the problem. And those people that they think they can help, when those prices go up, they're going to drop off the system. It's what's going to happen, in my opinion. Many of them will, if not all.
Well, and Walter, one of the unintended consequences, and I share this because I know your heart for our military men and women. It's a passion and a heart that I share.
Sure.
Is that now, because of Obamacare, we're looking at TRICARE and a number of other benefits that recruiters promise to our military men and women, that said, you know, these are critical parts of why you're staying in and re-enlisting. Now we're looking at changing that because we're trying to put them all on a system, and yet they've earned those rights. Many of them have gone and at great sacrifices to their family, and yet we're starting to see that component be affected, and that's unacceptable to me.
Mark, there are a lot of issues dealing with Obamacare and other issues dealing with the unemployment and the economy. You serve on the Government Oversight Committee, and I can share with you that many people watching this show in eastern North Carolina are very upset about Benghazi, very upset that the president bypassed Congress and bombed a foreign country that maybe had an evil leader, but they were no threat to us. I know you can't get into too much, but you sit on that committee, and I've seen you on TV myself asking the tough questions. What the people of Eastern North Carolina want to know is that if you and the committee will continue to try to get to the truth.
Well, the answer to that is yes, Walter. This is not politics.
No, it's not. Thank you, it's not.
We have 4 Americans that lost their lives, and we've got to get to the bottom of Benghazi and make sure that it doesn't ever happen again. I know you're committed to doing that, as we are on the committee, and you're right. That continues to go on. We had a hearing just last week, both in foreign affairs and on government oversight and reform, and getting to the bottom of it really is what we have to do. I made a commitment to those family members. I looked moms and dads in the face and wives in the face, and I made a commitment. I said, I'm not going to stop until we get to the bottom of this story and quite frankly hold people accountable. And the American people expect it. They deserve it, and we're committed to do that. We have subpoenas that are going out right now that are requesting additional information, but it's time that the other part that it does, Walter, is that in the military we're taught that if you're in harm's way, that your buddy is going to come in and they're going to be there, and your government is going to be there for you. And yet this sends a different message. We can't allow that message to reverberate throughout our military either. And so I know there are a number of us that are working together to hold our government accountable.
Well, I appreciate your comment. I think most people in my district and throughout the state and the nation realize this is really not politics. You said that, and I want to thank you for saying it. This is about America and the integrity of our government. And if the government officials, whether it be in the White House or the Congress or any other agency, if the truth doesn't matter, then our country is in deep, deep trouble. There's no way we can change that. I want to thank you personally. We had an amendment on the Armed Services Committee that Mr. McGovern, Democrat, and myself offered, that we would have more and better accountability of the taxpayers' money being spent in Afghanistan. And we didn't win that vote, but you very kindly joined me in saying that we need to have better accountability on the money being spent in Afghanistan. But that meant a great deal to me personally, because I have the Marines down in the district. I've talked to the Marines. They feel like it's not, we will not change one thing in Afghanistan. And yet, if the administration, which is in the process of negotiating a 10-year agreement, a bilateral strategic agreement, and if we have no accountability on how the money is being spent in Afghanistan, then how can we fix America's problems here. And so I want to thank you for your vote on that.
Well, I thank you for your leadership on that, Walter. You know, you have been an outspoken supporter of our military, and that was one example of saying, you know, we need to be accountable, but we need to make sure our government is accountable as well. One of the troubling things that I've heard in testimony is the amount of money we've spent just in Afghanistan. Right. You know, their annual gross domestic product is about $2 billion. We've invested $50 billion in roads and bridges, and many of them don't have a standard. They don't even serve a purpose. Some of them are not to engineering standards that we would support, and yet we continue to spend money, and it's that lack of accountability that the hardworking American taxpayers just say, well, when is Congress going to say enough is enough? So thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you for sharing those thoughts that you've had, because I know y'all have held hearings. I know John Micah was telling me one time that y'all held these hearings about the Afghan lack of accountability, and that he was just shocked.
Oh, we were. I serve on that committee with Chairman Micah, and when we started hearing the numbers, I had to question it. You know, we have $107 billion with a B. So 1/10 of our deficit was spent last year, and we don't know where the money went. You know, eventually we start talking about real money.
Absolutely. Well, in this situation, I'm sure when the people see this show, we're in the process now of deciding how we're going to handle a continuing resolution to keep the government open, and then soon after that we've got a debt ceiling debate coming forward. And Mark, it just seems like the times, I've been here a number of years, and this isn't the first CR, and it's certainly not the first debt ceiling debate that I've been part of, and it just seems like we in Washington, and that's why I have so pleased that you're on the show and knowing the group that you are a part of, that we seem to always feel like that we can spend our way out of debt and spend our way into prosperity. And you are a successful businessman, and you don't really have to be a successful businessman to know that doesn't add up to success. Well,
it doesn't, and it's as you say, it's just regular business principles that we're talking about. Winston Churchill had a quote like this. He says, you know, trying to tax your way, you know, into prosperity, and do that is like a man standing in a bucket trying to pick himself up by the handle. You know, it just doesn't work, and that's what we do time and time again. We say, well, we'll just kick the can down the road. We won't be accountable in Afghanistan. You know, we take it as this important area that we need to be investing in, and certainly there are objectives that are critical from a foreign policy standpoint. But when we're not accountable with it, we become, you know, very irresponsible with other people's money, and we need to spend it as if it were our own personal money each and every day we make a decision.
I recently was interviewed by a French lady from a magazine that John Gizzi, who used to work with Human Events, has set up. I didn't know the lady, but John and I go back a few years, and she came in, we were chatting about my position on Afghanistan and Syria, and she said, I would say, of course, her English was very difficult for me to understand because of the heavy French accent. Of course, she might not have been able to understand me clearly either, so that's a two-way street. But she was saying,
from North Carolina, we don't have an accent, right?
Well, we understand each other. That's
do.
the good thing. But she was saying, well, you must be an isolationist. And I said, no, ma'am, I'm not. I said, it simply comes down to our nation's in deep financial trouble. The Constitution says we will have a strong military. I said, my problem is, and this goes back to the previous administration, I said, our foreign policy is one of being a policeman, and we're getting to a point we can't afford to pay the policeman. Mm-hmm. And she kind of understood after I made that statement. But I feel that we as Congress, and you've already touched on it about accountability, that we are not doing as good a job as we need to, for the taxpayer to understand why we're spending this money that we don't really have.
Well, and at times, from a foreign policy standpoint and from a military point of view, Walter, we need to make sure that we have a clear military objective. Our yes needs to be yes, and our no needs to be no. And our allies and our enemies need to know what they can count on from us. And that's been very blurred for a long period of time. You mentioned Syria. I think overwhelmingly, when it came to Congress for us to look at military intervention in Syria, the people spoke up. I had over 3,200 people contact my office, and over 85% of them said, we don't want to have anything to do with it. So because of that, people like you and myself really stood with the people and said, you know what, we cannot intervene. And I think that's critical.
Well, it was nice for a change to see that both parties came together.
They did.
To work to stop the possibility of an attack by our government and our president. Let me, in the 2 or 3 minutes we have left, Mark, you were nominated by Mr. Obama as a congressional delegate to the United Nations. Will you explain? I think that's great. I mean, obviously, you bring something to the table, and would you kind of explain to the people watching the show what this means?
Well, it is a great honor. Every year, one Republican and one Democrat gets nominated to be the congressional liaison to the UN. In fact, I just came back from the UN General Assembly yesterday.
Oh, great. Okay.
And so as we were meeting with a number of leaders, it's all about making sure that we keep Congress informed of what's happening in the UN, and that we also make sure that the lines of what the UN does and what the United States does, that they don't get blurred. And I think that a lot of people that are listening to this show, they hear the two, and so I think it's defining those two and knowing what's an international role. You talk about being the policeman of the world. Some of that comes with being a superpower, but some of it really is an international role that needs to be enforced by the UN, peacekeeping troops or whatever it may be. And so it's really trying to make sure that I keep everybody informed. We've got a report that'll be coming back that we'll be sharing with you and others on what happened in the General Assembly.
Well, I appreciate what you were saying about make sure that the lines are defined, and the lines of communication help to define the lines to keep us so that we can continue to live by our Constitution and that be our driving force.
Well, and that is the driving force, and you and I agree on that, is that foundation of our Constitution is one that should be unchanged and shouldn't be rewritten. And when we know that those founding principles are key, substituting some international guideline or law to supplant the Constitution is not what you or I would support, and most of our colleagues wouldn't support that either.
Well, Mark, we've got just about a minute left. I want to thank you for being on this show, and I hope that the people watching the show that live in eastern North Carolina can see what an outstanding young man this is in the United States Congress, that I believe sincerely will be one of the leaders of our nation, one of the leaders of the Republican Party, both in North Carolina and at the national level. You have distinguished yourself in just only about 9 or 10 months, to be honest about it, as a young man who is being seen as thoughtful, that studies the issues, that you are one that even at such a young age in the Congress, that you do influence other people. And
well, those are very kind comments, but I tell you, learning from people like yourself and looking at the leadership that you exhibit day in and day out is a real encouragement to a new guy to the Congress. And so I just want to say thank you for your leadership. Thank you for listening to the folks back home. It sets a great example. We need to be doing more of that, and it's an honor to serve with you.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for those kind words and being on the show. And just about 1 minute, Glenn Downs, my chief of staff, who's been with me for 20 years. I'm most grateful for his friendship and his service to the people of the 3rd District. Will be on this show, and we'll talk about some issues that impact our district. Glenn, thank you again for joining me in this second portion of this October evaluation of where America is, so to speak.
Well, thank you very much once again for having me back. And as I always like to say, the people of Eastern North Carolina are not shy, and they don't mind telling their elected servants what they think and asking the hard questions. Sure. And part of why I think I'm here is to try to pass on those sentiments and ask some of those questions so that you can get some reaction. And I'd like to talk about some of the issues, but first I'd like to ask you something that people seem to be concerned about or at least curious about, and that is how the process works around here. It seems to them that there's a lot of frustration obviously out there, and they see people like you and Congressman Meadows sitting here talking, and the assumption is that all of Congress is sitting down like this, talking to each other, working through the issues of the day. And if that's really happening, why isn't more getting done? So our first question is that really happening?
Well, Glenn, it's not enough of that happening. We have friendships across the aisle. All of us do, Mark and anyone else, but you and as a chief of staff do. But the thing is, it seems like when we get to the floor, that the ability to have civility and try to sit down and have a discussion of what you believe in, what I believe in, can we find common ground, those things just don't happen. It seems like everything happens in the newspaper, on TV, or on these talk shows that, this side says that side says this, and we really are having what I consider what you're asking for, of the negotiations of trying to work things out instead of trying to fight. It just is very frustrating for all members of Congress who want to do what's right for the people.
Well, you and Congressman Meadows discussed Syria and the near military strike on Syria. And it seems that obviously your office got the same kind of calls like Mr. Meadows' office got. People were almost universally against it, or at least were very, very suspicious of it. Yet it seemed that before Congress could come in and deliberate, the leadership of Congress, of both parties, had made a decision and tried to set the paradigm under which your debate would happen or not happen, or even if you were going to have a debate. How typical is that? That's a pretty blatant example, but how typical is that?
Well, the odd thing which you mentioned and Mark and I mentioned was that we had both parties coming together. I was in a meeting that Rand Paul put together. There were 4 senators, 1 Democrat, 3 Republicans, and then we had about 18 members of the House with about 10 Republicans and about 8 Democrats to talk about what are we going to do to force a vote on going to Syria or not going to Syria, because all of us that I just mentioned were opposed to going into Syria with the president possibly bypassing us. It does not happen, and it seems like that right now everything is at a time of party politics, so to speak. It's more important that we find the common ground and put the party politics aside for the time being. There will be another election, God willing, and then we can get back into the differences of the parties. But right now, the president doesn't want to talk to the House leadership. The House leadership does not feel that if they can't sit down with the president, they're not going to be able to come to some negotiation. I don't know really how you bring people together at this point. We've got to get through this period of time of anxiety, and then maybe we can sit down and the leadership sit down at least and have a discussion on how we fix the problems. Our debt is well over $17 trillion. It's growing by the moment. We're paying roughly $1 million a day to pay the interest on the debt. It's just we've got to start dealing with these problems for the people of Eastern North Carolina, but the people of America.
Well, the people that we hear from at the staff level that call in to you, and we take notes and share their opinions and ideas and thoughts with you. So you and I have had these discussions before.
Sure.
but they what a lot of them don't want to be doing is spend as much time thinking about politics and the political process in Washington as they feel like they're forced to, because things aren't happening, or things aren't happening the way they think they should, and they want things to, frankly, go back to normal. And are we at a point in that debt cycle that you talked about, the unfunded mandates that you and your friend David Walker talk about, others, are we at the point where the new normal is kind of a continuing rolling crisis, or how close are we to that?
Glenn, I think your expression of your thoughts and David Walker's thoughts are really what the problem is. I'm not sure. We have not had passed a budget in Congress in 4 years. We have what's called these continuing resolutions. I think we might be in a new cycle, to use your expression. I really do. I think we might be in a cycle where we continue to not pass budgets, which I'm for a budget. I want to make that clear before we go off this show. But right now, I don't see it happening.
Well, one way out of this, or at least to get it on a more normal path, is for politicians and the people that elect politicians to make some hard decisions. You've talked about cutting overseas spending, and
right.
you've identified some really specific areas that can yield to tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of cuts. How many other colleagues are doing that?
Well, if you're talking about foreign aid or money's going to like Afghanistan, I don't see that many. Why the leadership of both parties, I want to be fair about that, do not understand that the American people are tired of building roads in Afghanistan while our roads are falling apart here in America. The American people need to continue to let their voices be heard to those of us who have the privilege to serve, and try to say to us, let's fix America's problems and not worry so much about the world problems. Glenn, with that, I'm sorry that it goes so quickly. Thank you for watching this show. Continue to pray for our troops. Continue to pray for America. And God, please continue to bless America. Thank you so much for watching.